She gave up her flight ticket for a desperate, tired father with a sick child, unaware that the man was actually a reclusive, millionaire CEO traveling in discreet anonymity. Under the oppressive, dim haze of an early winter morning, Charlotte International Airport was a study in cold chaos. A thick, pearly fog clung to the parking lot like a persistent phantom, swallowing the beams of headlights and blurring the anxious outlines of people dragging heavy luggage through the pre-dawn darkness. Inside the terminal, harsh fluorescent lights flickered mercilessly against the tall glass walls. The air was filled with the mechanical cadence of boarding announcements and the low, frustrated murmurs of passengers wrapped tightly in scarves and heavy winter coats. Angela stood near gate C12, leaning her back against a cold structural pillar. She gripped the worn handle of her suitcase with both hands, a gesture that betrayed a nervous energy she struggled to conceal. Her pale blonde hair was secured beneath a faded, wool hat, and the sleeves of her old coat were visibly thinning from years of use. Though the corners of her eyes bore the undeniable shadow of exhaustion, her gaze was steady. With a quick, hopeful glance at the flashing boarding screen, she pulled out her phone and pressed a familiar number. "I'm flying to New York this morning," she murmured. The phone pressed so tightly to her ear she could feel the heat. "If the interview goes well, this really could be the new beginning I need." There was a significant, heavy pause on the other end of the line, followed by a woman's voice, low, careful, and laced with palpable concern. "Are you sure about this, honey? After everything that's happened, the school closing, all those rejections?" Angela closed her eyes. The profound, suffocating weight of the past 6 months, the loss of her career, the stack of unreturned calls, threatened to rise and choke her. She forced herself to take a breath, steady but fragile. "I have to try, Mom," she whispered. "If I don't, I'll always wonder what might have happened. I just need to believe there's still a chance." She ended the call abruptly before she could allow the familiar currents of self-doubt to sweep her away, slipping the phone into her coat pocket. A single, scalding tear traced a path down her cheek, and she quickly wiped it away, instantly ashamed of the raw emotion. Even though no one was paying attention, she nervously glanced down at her boarding pass. JFK, Flight 719. Her fingers curled tighter around the suitcase handle, the plastic digging into her palm. Then it happened. A sound sliced through the noisy air, sharp, sudden, and carrying an emotion far deeper than simple traveler frustration. A child's scream, high-pitched, ragged, and raw. It pierced the surrounding din of the airport like fractured glass, immediately drawing startled, uncomfortable glances from everyone nearby. Angela turned her head toward the sound, a primal, instinctive alertness tightening her nerves. Her eyes scanned the dense sea of winter coats and rolling luggage until they finally found the source. A man, young, perhaps in his mid-30s, with disheveled dark hair and a face pale and severely weary, stood near the standby desk. Cradled tightly in his arms was a little girl who looked barely 5 years old. The child's skin was a ghostly, almost grayish-white, her eyes half-closed, and her breathing unnervingly shallow and uneven. Her tiny body jerked slightly with involuntary tremors, small, frightening spasms that made her father tighten his protective grip. The man's voice, though desperately hushed, trembled with naked urgency. "Please," he pleaded with the gate attendant, his desperation leaking into every syllable. "She needs medical attention in New York today. I will pay whatever it takes. Triple the fare. Just please get us on that flight." The woman behind the counter shook her head, her expression professional, yet visibly uncomfortable with the crisis unfolding before her. "Sir, I understand entirely, but this is a fully booked flight. Without prior medical clearance or confirmed documentation, we cannot make last-minute changes. I am truly sorry." The man's broad shoulders slumped. When he spoke again, his voice cracked from the strain and lack of sleep. "I drove all night. I've tried every single airline. She might not make it through the weekend." Angela's heart hammered a heavy, rapid rhythm against her ribs. The ambient noise of the terminal completely faded away, replaced by the ringing urgency of the moment. Her gaze was fixed intensely on the girl's limp form, the way her tiny, frail hand clung weakly to the rough wool of the man's coat, her mouth slightly agape as she struggled for each shallow breath. Angela felt something powerful stir inside her, something strong, familiar, and utterly undeniable. "Dear God," she whispered, the words barely audible even to herself. Her hands relaxed their death grip on the suitcase handle. She didn't check the time. She didn't look back at the illuminated gate display displaying her flight number. She took one step forward, then another, the worn soles of her shoes silent on the industrial carpet. Angela walked toward them. She stepped closer to the man, her eyes never leaving the small, silent girl nestled in his arms. The child's skin held a disturbing bluish tinge, and her eyelids fluttered weakly, unevenly. Her tiny chest rose and fell with the shallow, rapid breaths that signaled struggle, and her body began to twitch in the early, frightening signs of a seizure. Angela's voice was gentle, outwardly steady, yet filled with profound, quiet concern. "Is she okay? She doesn't look well at all." The man looked up, startled by her sudden presence, but too utterly exhausted to attempt to hide his fear. His voice was worn thin from hours of worry and the grind of desperation. "The doctor said it could be days, maybe less. She has a congenital neurological disorder, severe. There's a chance she might slip into a coma without treatment. We're trying to get her to a specialist in New York. I tried to charter a private flight, but the snowstorm grounded everything. All commercial flights were booked weeks ago. I drove through the night hoping I could find something, anything. I got here at 5 this morning, just praying anyone would cancel." Angela glanced down at the boarding pass clutched in her hand. Flight 719 to JFK. Her flight, her interview, her single, desperately needed shot at starting her life over. She hesitated for only a fraction of a second, then looked back at the girl who was so fragile, so heartbreakingly still. Her small hand was weakly curled near her father's collar. Something fundamental inside Angela shifted. "I have a seat on that flight," she said softly. The man blinked once, unsure he had heard her correctly amidst the terminal noise. "You do?" Angela nodded and offered a gentle, genuine smile. "You and your daughter need it infinitely more than I do." He stared at her, utterly stunned, his pale eyes searching hers for a hint of sarcasm or trickery. "Are you sure? Are you really okay with that? Missing your flight? That's not something most people would just give up." Angela looked down at her scuffed shoes, a painful reminder of her financial reality, then back into his eyes. "I was heading to New York for a job interview. I'm a teacher. Or I was. The school I worked for closed down, and I've been applying for months with no luck. This was finally a chance to get back on my feet." She paused, the weight of the sacrifice settling. "But I can try again. Your daughter doesn't get another shot at this." A heavy, absolute silence fell between them. The terminal continued to move around them. Boarding calls, the rumble of rolling luggage, anonymous murmurs. But in their small corner of chaos, everything had stilled. The man tightened his protective hold on his daughter and slowly, profoundly nodded. It was the kind of nod that carried a gratitude too immense and shattering for mere words. Angela turned to the gate agent, whose professional facade had softened, her eyes glistening. "Please transfer my seat to him. Flight 719 to JFK." The agent, who had been intently watching the exchange, simply nodded without a word, already typing furiously. The man swallowed hard, his voice thick and broken as he spoke to Angela. "I don't even know your name. You just saved my daughter's life." Angela smiled again, soft but full of warmth, offering him a final urgency. "Then go while she still has the chance." As the man prepared to board, Angela reached into her worn carry-on bag and pulled out a small wooden keychain, carved in the simple shape of an apple. It was smooth, sanded perfect by years of handling, a token she used to give her very best students as a keepsake. She knelt slightly and carefully placed it into the child's trembling, cool hand. "For you," she whispered, looking into the girl's cloudy, half-open eyes. "Carry it with you. It's your lucky charm." "Okay." The girl stirred slightly, her lips parting just enough to form a faint, almost invisible smile. Her tiny fingers closed weakly around the wooden apple. The man looked on, his eyes suddenly wet with hot tears. Slowly, he reached down and unfastened the thin, plastic hospital bracelet from around his daughter's wrist. He stepped forward and gently placed it into Angela's hand. "It's just a plastic band," he said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "But to me, you deserve all the good in this world." Angela looked down at it, the tiny strip of white plastic with ink already fading, and carefully closed her fingers around it. He nodded once more, a solemn vow of thanks, then turned and walked rapidly toward the gate with his daughter clutched securely in his arms. Angela stood alone, watching them disappear through the jetway entrance and into the distant crowd. The hospital bracelet lay in her palm, weightless yet impossibly heavy, as if it held not only a child's name but also a fragment of something much deeper, a decision that had just quietly, definitively rewritten the entire course of her life. The morning light had finally broken through the oppressive gray sky by the time Angela boarded the city bus. The vinyl seats were cold to the touch, and the windows were already fogged by the contrast between the warmth of breath and the frigid winter air outside. She slid into a seat near the back, pressed her forehead lightly against the glass, and pulled her coat tighter around her slender frame. Clutched like a fragile lifeline in her hand was the small, plastic hospital bracelet. The name scrawled on it was already beginning to fade, but the tangible weight of the plastic in her palm was starkly, painfully real. Outside, the streets of Charlotte passed in a dreary blur of concrete, silent, skeletal trees, and early, weary commuters. The bus hissed and lurched forward at each stop, its motion a lulling but unkind rhythm. Angela sat unmoving, her eyes distant and unfocused. Her thoughts were louder than the metallic hum of the engine. She thought of her classroom, the hazy sunlight pouring through dusty blinds, the messy, vibrant art projects pinned carelessly to the walls, the sudden, loud laughter of children. She saw the faces of her students, their bright, trusting eyes, the way they used to shout her name. Asterisk Mrs. Angela. Asterisk they had believed in her, and she, in turn, had once believed fiercely in herself. She remembered the day the school closed, the hollow echo of the staff gathering in the cafeteria, the principal's voice heavy with defeat as he read the final announcement about budget cuts. Then the silence afterward, and the long, painful months that followed. Rejection after rejection, her meager savings draining away, the quiet, painful echo of her own voice in the empty apartment where no one ever answered back. A tear slipped silently down her cheek. She wiped it quickly, hoping no one had noticed her quiet grief. A gentle tap on her shoulder made her turn her head. An older woman, probably in her 70s, sat a few rows behind her. Her expression was soft, profoundly knowing, and utterly without judgment. Without uttering a single word, she reached into her handbag and pulled out a small packet of tissues, extending one toward Angela. Angela hesitated, then accepted it with a quiet, choked, "Thank you." The woman smiled faintly and looked away, as if kindness needed no lengthy explanation. Angela turned back to the window, holding the tissue in one hand and the bracelet in the other. She pressed them both to her chest for a long moment, breathing in slowly, trying to regulate her emotions. The bus ride seemed interminable. When it finally reached her stop, she stepped off into the deep, cutting cold again. The wind sliced across her cheeks as she walked the last few blocks to her apartment, each step heavier than the last. Her building was hushed. She climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor and unlocked the door to her unit. The room was unnaturally still. The old gas heater hadn't yet kicked on, and the air inside was colder than she remembered. Angela placed her worn bag down by the door, unwrapped her scarf, and stood for a moment, simply looking around. The furniture was sparse, the lighting dim and yellowed. On the small kitchen table sat a single envelope, stark white, crisp, and maddeningly unopened. Her breath hitched in her throat. She walked over slowly, picked up the letter, and opened it with shaking hands. It was the confirmation, the formal interview invitation from New York, the one she had dreamed about and held on to fiercely through nights of gnawing doubt. She read the first few lines, then lowered the page. Her fingers tightened, then relaxed, the tension draining away. She tore the paper in half, a clean, precise rip. One half drifted silently to the floor like a fallen feather. She did not cry out. She did not collapse. Instead, she slid slowly down the wall and sat on the cold wooden floor, her knees drawn up to her chest, the hospital bracelet still clutched tightly in her palm. Her eyes stared ahead, unfocused, but filled with something deeper than raw sorrow, something closer to surrender, yet not quite defeat. It was grief, certainly, but also a strange, profound peace. The tears came slowly this time, tracing silent, hot paths down her cheeks. She had given something up. She had lost a chance at a desperately needed future. But somehow, deep inside, she knew with absolute certainty that she had done the right thing, even if no one else saw it, even if nothing good ever came from it. She rested her head against the wall and closed her eyes, the cold seeping through the floor beneath her, yet the warmth of that little girl's tiny, trembling hand still lingering impossibly in her memory. 3 days later, the harsh morning light filtered weakly through the blinds of Angela's small apartment. The old gas heater rattled softly in the corner, barely succeeding in warming the air. She sat at the edge of her kitchen table, slowly chewing on a piece of dry toast, the final slice of bread she owned. Her coffee mug was empty, now filled only with lukewarm water. The crushing silence of the apartment wrapped around her like a second, cold coat. She stared blankly at the wall, lost in the heavy cycle of her thoughts. The torn half of the interview letter still lay where she had left it on the floor. The hospital bracelet sat beside it, untouched since that morning. A stark symbol of a life saved, a bitter reminder of an opportunity lost. Then came a knock at the door. It was soft but firm, and entirely unexpected. Angela froze instantly. For a moment, she simply stared at the wooden surface, unsure if her despairing mind had conjured it. Then it came again. 2 short taps, deliberate and measured. Cautiously, she stood and slowly crossed the room, every step echoing loudly against the wooden floorboards. Her hand hovered over the cold doorknob. She turned it slowly, hesitantly. Standing in the hallway was Mark. He looked strikingly different in the clear daylight, less frantic, utterly composed. His dark hair was neatly combed. His expensive coat was buttoned precisely, and his shoes were polished to a mirror sheen. In one hand, he held a small, slightly wilted bouquet of wild daisies. In the other, a thick, sealed envelope. Angela blinked, genuinely stunned. How did you find me?" Mark offered a soft, gentle smile that did not quite reach his tired eyes. "It wasn't hard. I remembered your name from the ticket transfer documents. I looked you up through the school district records." Angela glanced nervously at the humble flowers, then back at him, her defenses raised. "Why are you here?" Mark stepped forward slightly, but remained respectfully outside the threshold, honoring the boundary of her private space. "Because I couldn't just let what you did go unanswered. After I boarded that plane, after we landed and Linda was admitted immediately to the hospital, I couldn't stop thinking about you." Angela said nothing, her expression carefully unreadable. Mark continued, his voice quieter, more solemn now. "You gave up something that mattered deeply to you, a chance to rebuild your life, for someone you had never met. And you did it without a moment's hesitation." Angela looked down at the floor, uncomfortable with the praise. It felt like the right thing to do. Mark nodded slowly, accepting her humility. "And it was. You didn't just help my daughter. You reminded me that there are still people in this world who lead with genuine, unwavering kindness." He extended the envelope toward her. Angela took it carefully, her fingers brushing briefly against his. She opened it and pulled out a letter, thick, formal paper embossed with a professional logo she didn't recognize at first. Then she read the words printed neatly at the top. * Lighthouse Learning. Her brows furrowed in confusion. "What is this?" Mark took a settling breath. "I'm the founder of a non-profit educational network. We run specialized schools for children with autism and other developmental needs. We just opened a brand new school right here in Charlotte. I was actually visiting other campuses when Linda fell ill. Angela's mouth parted slightly in disbelief. You run schools? I do, Mark confirmed, his eyes steady. And we need teachers. Not just anyone, but the kind of teacher who sees children for who they are, not what their test scores or limitations dictate. The kind who gives everything, even when they believe no one is watching. Angela blinked, still clutching the formal letter. Do you want me to work at your school? I want you to teach, he said gently. In the classroom that's waiting for someone just like you. Angela looked away, a dizzying rush of complex emotions rising fast within her. I don't even know if I'm still good at it. It's been months, and the last few years. They weren't easy. Mark stepped closer, his voice low but absolutely certain. I watched you give up a dream for someone else's child. That tells me more than any resume ever could about your core. Our students need someone who leads with heart, with compassion. And I think you're exactly who they need. She stared at him, torn between utter disbelief and the fragile, precious flicker of hope rekindling deep inside her. Angela looked back at the letter, then at Mark. Why me? Mark smiled again, not with pity or charity, but with quiet, profound admiration. Because when no one else moved, you did. And for the first time in days, Angela felt something other than soul-crushing grief. She felt possibility. Angela stood at the front of the small classroom, her hands resting lightly on the polished teacher's desk as she scanned the dozen children seated silently before her. Each one was unique, tucked deeply into their own quiet, individual world. Some rocked gently in place. Others studiously avoided her gaze, and not a single child responded when she called out their name. It was her first day at Lighthouse Learning, and the profound, challenging silence felt heavy and formidable. But Angela didn't allow the silence to shake her professional resolve. She began with a story. Her voice was calm and melodic as she read from a handmade book about a brave little fox who found courage deep within himself during a fierce storm. She held up the colorful drawings she had stayed up late sketching the night before. Most of the children still didn't look directly at her, but she noticed several small, encouraging shifts. Tiny fingers tapping lightly to the rhythm of her voice, one little girl blinking slowly, signaling she was intently listening. It was more than nothing. It was a start. In the challenging days that followed, she tried everything she knew. Color-matching games that engaged the senses, soft classical music blended with the gentle sound of bells and drums, and finger painting with textured paper that provided a novel sensory experience. She learned quickly what calmed the children and what instantly unsettled them. There was Mia, a small girl who cried hysterically every morning at drop-off. On the third day, instead of forcing comfort, Angela crouched beside her and gently began telling an improvised story about a hidden garden. Mia instantly stopped screaming. She sat down. She listened. After the story ended, she even smiled, a brief, glorious flash of light. One afternoon, a mother approached Angela near the doorway, her eyes visibly wet with tears. My daughter hugged you today, she whispered, overwhelmed. That's never, ever happened before. Thank you. Angela simply nodded, overcome with emotion herself, and she carried those small, monumental moments home with her like priceless treasures. Mark had been observing her intently from the hallway. At first, he kept his respectful distance, but gradually he began joining in, helping with story time, passing out supplies, and even folding complex paper boats with the children. He didn't interfere with her methodology. He simply supported, always watching the precise way Angela moved with such deliberate patience and intention. One day, while preparing a classroom display about dreams, they sat side by side on the floor, cutting colored paper into sail shapes for a bulletin board. The children had drawn pictures of who they hoped to be: astronauts, artists, famous chefs. A little boy looked up from his drawing and asked with innocent curiosity, "Or are you two friends?" Angela paused, slightly caught off guard by the question. Mark chuckled warmly, cutting a perfect blue sail. "Very special friends," he said warmly. Angela laughed too, lightly brushing her hair behind her ear, but her heart gave a sudden, surprised flutter. She felt the quiet truth in his words. Late one evening, Angela stayed behind, working quietly under the buzzing fluorescent lights of the empty school building. She didn't hear Mark approach until he placed a steaming mug of tea gently beside her. "You should rest," he murmured. "You've done enough for today." Angela didn't look up immediately. "I like staying. It reminds me that I met her again." He sat across from her, silent for a moment, the shared quiet comfortable between them. Then, softly, he began to share his past. "I lost my wife when Linda was 2. She was the brave one, especially with kids. These schools, lighthouse learning, they are entirely in her memory." Angela's eyes finally met his, filled with sudden sympathy. "I'm so sorry." "It's okay," he replied. "This place helps me remember who she was and who I want to be for Linda." Angela, in turn, shared her own story. The abrupt closing of her beloved school, the endless stream of rejection letters, the crushing fear that she had lost the best, most essential part of herself. Mark didn't offer hollow cliches or empty reassurances. He simply looked at her gently, his gaze penetrating and kind. "You didn't lose it, Angela. You just needed the right place for it to shine through." Their silence felt warm, restorative, not heavy. Something fundamental had shifted between them that night. A few weeks later, the staff gathered in the school library for a routine meeting. Mark stood at the front holding a thin folder. "We've all seen the incredible changes happening in room 4, he began, his voice ringing with pride. "The trust being built, the quiet care, the daily breakthroughs. And it's time we formally recognize what that kind of leadership truly means for our network." He turned toward Angela, who was sitting near the front. "This school needs a principal with a heart like yours, someone who leads with genuine, transformative compassion." Angela froze, utterly speechless. "Me?" He smiled. "You've been leading us from the start, Angela." Tears welled instantly in her eyes as she slowly stepped forward, taking the folder in trembling hands. After the meeting, Mark found her standing in the quiet hallway. He pulled a small, leather-bound notebook from the inner pocket of his coat. The cover was simple, embossed with the phrase, "Lead with kindness." "I've had this for a while," he said, his voice low. "I was waiting for the right person to give it to." Angela opened the notebook, tracing the words with her finger, and smiled through her tears, her heart full to bursting. For the first time in years, she felt profoundly seen. Not for what she had painfully lost, but for everything she had inherently to give. It was a late afternoon, the kind that painted the sky in soft gold and quiet, hesitant pinks. Angela was in her new office, organizing student drawings into a neatly labeled portfolio. Stared at the sketches pinned on her dream wall when she heard a gentle, hesitant knock. She walked to the door and opened it, letting the afternoon sunlight spill into the hallway. Standing there, framed by the light, were Mark and a little girl. Mark stood tall, his posture relaxed, hands tucked into his coat pockets. Beside him was a child with eyes that sparkled like polished amber and cheeks flushed with a robust, vibrant color. It was Linda. Angela's breath hitched in her throat, a wave of profound relief washing over her. The child was dramatically transformed from the fragile, pale figure she remembered trembling at the airport gate. Linda's hair had grown into soft, shimmering waves that brushed her shoulders. Her stance was confident, her movements agile. The moment her bright eyes locked onto Angela, all hesitation vanished. She bolted forward. "Miss Angela!" Angela dropped instantly to her knees, just in time to receive the full force of Linda's embrace. The girl hugged her with fierce loyalty, small arms wrapping tightly around Angela's neck, a gesture that felt less like a greeting and more like a long-awaited homecoming. Angela held her close, a feeling of deep, aching warmth swelling in her chest. When they finally pulled apart, Angela spotted something familiar peeking out of Linda's small, purple backpack, a beloved companion from that fateful day, the small, worn wooden Apple keychain. Tears pricked at Angela's eyes, suddenly blurring the edges of the brightly lit hallway. "You kept it?" Linda nodded emphatically, her smile wide and slightly gap-toothed. "It's my magic apple. Daddy says you gave me superpowers that day, so I couldn't be sad anymore." Angela laughed softly, the sound tinged with emotion, and brushed a comforting hand through Linda's hair. No, sweet girl. You had those powers all along. Mark stepped closer, his voice low and rich with gratitude. She talks about you constantly, calls you the magic lady from the airport. She even drew a series of pictures for her therapist, a whole timeline of her getting better, and you're right there in the first frame. Angela looked up at him, her eyes wide with unshed emotion, taking in the full picture of the thriving child. She looks absolutely amazing. She is, Mark affirmed, his own voice catching slightly with pride. And it's entirely because of you. You saved her. Later that week, Mark extended an invitation for Angela to join them and a handful of the Lighthouse Learning students on a short nature walk to the nearby park. The children, released from the confines of the classroom, laughed in chorus, sprinting ahead to chase vibrant yellow butterflies and gather clumps of cheerful dandelions. Angela walked serenely, holding the hands of two excited students, guiding them gently over the tree roots that crisscrossed the trail. Mark followed a few paces behind, his attention divided between holding Linda's small hand and occasionally lifting his phone. Unbeknownst to Angela, he wasn't checking messages. He was quietly snapping photos. These weren't posed shots. They were candid, stolen moments. Angela kneeling with a student to examine the delicate veining of a fallen leaf. The pure, unfiltered joy in her laughter when a boy triumphantly presented her with a crooked stick shaped exactly like a serpent. Mark captured the instant Linda slipped between them, grabbing both their hands and swinging happily as they walked, her small body linking them physically. For a quiet, powerful moment, they looked like a complete, natural family unit, and the sight of it sparked a profound, unexpected warmth deep within Mark's chest. That evening, Mark asked Angela to dinner. She accepted immediately. The date was simple and perfect. An outdoor table at a small, classic Italian restaurant, nestled away in a secluded, quiet corner of town. Angela wore a pale blue dress that moved gracefully around her knees, modest yet undeniably elegant in the soft evening light. Mark was in a comfortable gray button-down, wearing a subtle, consistent smile that seemed to be reserved only for her. They lingered over rich pasta and the flickering glow of a candle, their conversation flowing with an ease that felt like years of familiarity. Mark shared the grueling early days of building Lighthouse Learning, the relentless failures, the budget crises, and the dark nights when he had almost surrendered the entire dream. Angela reciprocated, sharing vivid stories of her former students, the books that had shaped her philosophy, and the educational dreams that had once seemed too lofty and distant to ever vocalize. Then, Mark's expression shifted, becoming intensely serious. He leaned forward slightly. I don't think I ever articulated this clearly or properly, but thank you. Not just for what you did for Linda that day, but for what you inadvertently reminded me of. Angela tilted her head, prompting him gently. What's that? That it's still possible to believe in people again, he said, his gaze unwavering. You showed me that kindness isn't some abstract, fragile idea. It's a physical choice. A choice that fundamentally changes lives, mine included. Angela's eyes softened, a sudden rush of air catching in her throat. For a long, significant moment, they simply looked at each other. The space between their quiet table and the surrounding chatter felt charged with something unspoken, something neither was fully prepared to articulate or name, yet it was undeniably present, certain, and growing stronger with every shared silence. 1 year later, Angela stood backstage in the cavernous expanse of a grand New York City ballroom, the thumping of her own heart echoing in her ears. Before her stretched endless rows of pristine white chairs, all facing a stage where a majestic banner proclaimed, National Conference on Special Education, honoring voices that inspire. The hall was filled to capacity with educators, therapists, and school administrators gathered from every corner of the country. Angela smoothed the fabric of her tailored dress and inhaled deeply, centering herself. This was the exact conference she had been poised to attend 12 months ago, the one whose ticket she had selflessly relinquished. Back then, she had arrived seeking a desperately needed job. Today, she was the chosen keynote speaker. As she stepped onto the stage, a profound hush fell over the audience. A warm spotlight illuminated her shoulders, She walked purposefully to the podium and looked out at the sea of expectant faces, her composure absolute. "I want to begin by telling you a very short story," she started, her voice clear and resonant. "A year ago, I was standing in an airport terminal, clutching a ticket to New York, clinging to the fragile hope that this massive, intimidating city might finally offer me a new start." She paused, allowing the weight of the memory to settle. "But then I heard a child's cry, a sound of pure terror, and I saw a father utterly desperate to save his daughter. He was out of time, out of options, and she was out of strength. I realized I had a choice." Angela briefly glanced down at her hands, which rested lightly on the podium. "I gave him my seat. I genuinely thought I was forfeiting my entire chance at a future, sacrificing my professional aspirations. Instead, I was being handed something infinitely greater, a true purpose." A gentle smile lit her face. "That little girl lived. That father became my dearest friend. And that single, frightening moment brought me crashing back to what I love most. Teaching children who require not only tailored lessons, but unconditional love." Her voice faltered slightly, heavy with conviction. "I thought I had lost everything I was chasing. But in reality, I was simply being led, circuitously and perfectly, back home." The response was instantaneous and overwhelming. A wave of applause erupted, becoming a standing ovation. Many people in the audience were visibly weeping. From the side of the stage, Mark appeared, impeccably dressed in a navy suit, holding a small, polished wooden plaque. He joined Angela at the center and turned to address the roaring crowd. "It is my distinct honor to present the Educator of the Year award to someone who teaches not just with exhaustive knowledge, but with an unparalleled capacity for heart. Please join me in congratulating Angela Moore." He handed her the award, the engraved plaque cool and solid in her hands, and their eyes met in a shared, quiet recognition that seemed to block out the cacophony of the room. Later that night, after the grand ballroom had emptied and the last attendees had drifted away, Mark found Angela near the deserted exit. "Come," he said softly, offering his arm. "Let me show you the city you missed last year." They walked side by side through the cold, crisp New York night. Soft, tentative flakes of snow began to drift down as the streets glowed under the warm, golden light of the street lamps. They paused briefly near a cluster of twinkling lights where a string quartet played a melancholic, beautiful tune. Angela sighed contentedly. "I never imagined I would stand on that stage in this city." Mark turned to her, his expression certain. "I knew you would, from the precise moment you gave away that ticket." Angela laughed gently, shaking her head. "That's a rather bold assumption." Mark shook his head firmly in response. "Not bold, just certain. People like you have the capacity to change lives, even in the very moment you think yours is falling entirely apart." As they carefully crossed a quiet, snow-dusted side street, Angela's footing slipped unexpectedly on the fresh powder. Mark reacted instantly, catching her waist and steadying her with firm, gentle hands. She laughed, a small, nervous sound. "I still don't know how to walk in the snow." Mark didn't release his hold. He held her steady for a moment longer, looking down at her, his voice dropping to a warm whisper. "Then let me be the one who holds you up." Their hands remained linked, his grasp protective and warm, as they continued their walk, side by side, perfectly aligned. The morning sun streamed softly through the tall, arched windows of the principal's office, bathing the polished wooden desk and the bulletin boards, already crammed with colorful student art, in warm, inviting light. Angela sat quietly at her desk, a ceramic mug of tea cooling beside her, its contents long forgotten. Her gaze was fixed on the schoolyard outside, where the vibrant sounds of children's laughter and shouts floated up to her. These were children she now knew intimately, calling them by name, carrying their personal stories like small, treasured stones in her heart. She smiled faintly as she watched a group of them chase a bright red ball, their joy radiating outward like pure sunlight. Suddenly, a familiar, enthusiastic voice pierced her reverie. "Ms. Angela!" She turned just in time to catch Linda sprinting full tilt into the office. The little girl wrapped her arms tightly around Angela's waist in a powerful, non-negotiable hug. Angela chuckled, embracing her in return. Well, someone's full of energy this morning. Linda grinned up at her, breathing hard. We finished our reading circle early, and Daddy said I could come say hi. Just then, Mark appeared framed in the doorway, holding a paper cup with a wisp of steam rising from the lid. Your usual, he said, offering the coffee with that soft, reliable smile. Angela took the cup, their fingers brushing momentarily. For a minute, they stood in comfortable, easy silence, watching Linda skip back into the hallway, her mission accomplished. You look exactly like you're meant to be here, Mark said gently, observation rather than question. Angela nodded, sipping the coffee gratefully. For the first time in a very long time, I feel like I am. Weeks passed and the air turned bracingly crisp. The schoolyard was scattered with the rich colors of golden and russet leaves. One crisp afternoon, Mark approached Angela with a curious, secretive glint in his eye. Would you meet me in the library after school? He asked. There's something quite important I'd like to show you. Angela agreed, not thinking much of the request until she stepped into the school library later that day and gasped, stopping dead in her tracks. The cavernous space had been utterly transformed. Tiny, twinkling fairy lights were draped across the ceiling beams like constellations. Paper lanterns, handcrafted by the students, glowed softly from the ends of the bookshelves. A winding path of tiny battery-operated candles led her toward the central reading nook. There, several students stood holding up handmade signs painted in bright, eager colors. The signs collectively read, Will you marry our principal? Angela brought her hands to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock and sudden, overwhelming emotion. Mark stepped forward from behind the cluster of giggling children. He looked profoundly nervous, his shoulders set, but his eyes held nothing but absolute, committed love. You gave my daughter a second chance at life, he began slowly, his voice thick with meaning. You gave my school a sense of renewal, and my students a phenomenal role model to believe in. And most crucially, you gave me back a part of my heart I honestly thought I'd lost forever. He knelt gracefully onto one knee, pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and opened it to reveal a simple, elegant solitaire diamond ring that caught the light beautifully. Angela Moore, will you complete our family? Will you marry me? Tears immediately flooded her eyes. She nodded rapidly. Her response caught somewhere between a gasp, a laugh, and a grateful sob. Yes, yes. The wedding was small but exquisitely perfect, held exactly where their community had flourished. In the school courtyard beneath the sprawling, ancient oak tree. The entire ceremony was infused with the children's creativity. Handmade paper and fabric flowers, crafted with ribbons and painstaking care, were strung everywhere. Linda, radiating happiness, wore a simple white dress and carried a bouquet of deep fabric roses. She stood proudly as the world's happiest, most important little bridesmaid. Angela walked down the makeshift aisle, not to grand processional music or formal, rigid speeches, but to the sweet, genuine sound of children's laughter and the gentle, comforting hum of a life that had been beautifully and miraculously rewritten by kindness. As the late afternoon sun began to dip behind the neighboring trees, Mark and Angela stood hand in hand, Linda nestled securely between them, her small fingers wrapped tightly around theirs. They looked out over their students, their school, their home, and they knew, with a certainty that settled deep in their bones, that everything they cherished had begun with a single, quiet act of compassion. A single choice, the relinquishing of a single seat, and a heart brave enough to let it go. A single act of kindness may not instantly change the world, but it possesses the immense power to change someone's entire life. And sometimes, almost impossibly, it ends up changing yours too. Thank you for watching this heartwarming journey of compassion, resilience, and unexpected, profound love. Angela's story reminds us all that sometimes the smallest, most selfless acts of kindness can lead to the most extraordinary and fulfilling outcomes, and that giving up something essential today might just be the very action that opens the door to everything you were truly meant for tomorrow. If this story touched your heart and uplifted your spirit, we warmly invite you to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories for more true, emotional, and genuinely inspiring tales that remind us of the enduring beauty in humanity. Don't forget to like, share, and leave us a comment about the exact moment that moved you the most. Until next time, keep believing in kindness, keep believing in each other, and always remember, your story might just be the one that changes someone else's life. Subscribe now to soul-stirring stories.